I know self-publishing's not for everyone. Nothing is. But if you've considered self-publishing for even a minute, listen up, because I'm betting I know what's holding you back from exploring it further or getting started. Number one, you think the self-publishing process is a lot harder than it actually is. And number two, you're understandably afraid of doing it, air quote, wrong. So I've created a new free resource for you. It's called the Self-Publishing Starter Kit, and you can get instant access to it by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101. In this free training, you'll discover the exact 4 steps to focus on and mistakes to avoid so you can publish an incredible book that's indistinguishable in quality from a New York Times bestseller without overthinking, overguessing, or overspending in areas that won't make a difference. Again, visit publishaprofitablebook.com/self-publishing 101 to get instant access. Welcome to the Write the Damn Book Already podcast. My name is Elizabeth Lyons. I'm a 6-time author and book editor, and I help people write and publish powerful, thought-provoking, wildly entertaining books without any more overthinking, second-guessing, or overwhelm than absolutely necessary. Because let's face it, some overthinking, second-guessing, and overwhelm is going to come with the territory if you're anything like me. I believe that story and shared perspective are 2 of the most potent ways we connect with one another, and that your story, perspective, and insights are destined to become someone else's favorite resource or pastime. For more book writing and publishing tips and solutions, and plenty of free and low-cost resources, visit publishaprofitablebook.com. And for recommendations of fabulous books you've possibly never heard of, book writing inspiration, and the occasional meme so relatable you'll wonder if it was created with you in mind, follow me on Instagram at Elizabeth Lyons Author. Hi there, and welcome to another fun and insightful episode of Write the Damn Book Already. This week, I'm chatting with Jessica Saunders, whose debut novel, Love Me, will have just come out when this episode is released. It's published by Union Square and Company, and we had so much fun chatting about how she went from attorney to author, finding time to write, getting the first draft out, her decision on traditional versus self-publishing, finding an agent, and now getting ready to launch. Spoiler alert, even as a traditionally published author, she hired an outside PR group to help with the marketing, and she does name them in the episode. So listeners can start creating their own Rolodex, not meaning to date myself or age myself with that term, but of sources to consider as they're filling up their author team. As always, Jessica's info and all mentioned resources are in the episode notes. Let's get to the chat. Kind of random first question, but is or was Love Me the original title?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. Well, I'm actually curious why you're asking.
Yeah, no, it's great, and I could not love the cover more. The reason I ask is only because it is so common that I talk to authors who will say, well, this wasn't the original title. And it's almost an aside when they say it. But then I have to ask, well, what was the original title?
Right.
And who made that change? Because sometimes it's the author. They start with one title and then they write and they think, no, this isn't it. And sometimes it's the publisher and sometimes it's a combination. So that's interesting that it stayed.
Well, it's a great question, and I laugh because I had it as my working title, and when we went out and pitched, the book on submission, it was Love Me, and maybe I don't know, like a few months after I sold the book, I had a meeting with my editor. And I said, I'm like, oh, so what do you think the title's going to be? And they were like, what are you talking about? We're going to use Love Me. And I said, why? Like, I don't get it. It definitely is a good title. I agree. I love the cover.
Yes.
And it works without a doubt. It works, but it was truly for me it was a working title, and I suppose that they liked it. So I think it's a great question, because I imagine that a lot of authors aren't that, don't they maybe get the final say, but they're not, there's like more strategizing, but I think they were happy with it, which I guess is great.
Sure. And I mean, sometimes
surprised.
you're correct. Like the experiences run the gamut. Sometimes they don't get the final say at all, and they're not terribly thrilled about what it ends up being. Sometimes they warm up to it. Sometimes they do get a say. I've even heard of, and I think you have to be a little further along in your career as an author. Like you have to be in that top, whatever, 1 or 2% of your house's author pool, where people have written it into the contract that they have final say over certain creative things. I mean, again, you have to be at a certain point to be able to command that, but
makes sense.
It does make sense. I mean, the
Yeah.
higher, I'd be demanding certain things too. So tell me about your writing process, because this is your debut, right?
It is my debut.
Okay. So tell me about just all the things. Where did it come from? All the things?
Sure. No, so I'm a lawyer, actually.
Right.
And I'm still working as a lawyer. And so I've always done a ton of writing in my job, in my like day-to-day life. And I've always loved to read. Reading has been a huge part of my life forever, since I was, in second grade. And I think writing a book had always just been sort of something I knew I wanted to do. And I really hope that I could one day do, but of course, like all things, it sort of fell to the back burner. And then when I was right after I turned 40, sadly, I lost a very close friend. And so, obviously, in addition to all the grief, it forced me to take some stock of my life, and all my girlfriends felt similarly, and we all were like, okay, what can we do better? And for me, it was, okay, I've been saying for 25 years that I want to write a novel. I really should make an attempt to do it. And so very shortly after, I signed up for a writing class through Gotham Writers Workshop, and it was a weekly online but live class, and it was just a fantastic opportunity for me to kind of get this thing off the ground and get started. And when I started writing, I found that I just loved it. I loved it as much as I hoped that I would. It came as, naturally to me as I had hoped that it would, but you never really know. And so I really, as a means for getting started, I just kind of went into it and really worked at it and loved it so much.
Were there hiccups along the way where you were writing and then you would be like, I don't know if this is working?
Yeah. I think, well, a few things. I mean, taking this class was terrific, because it was, very much, it was called a first draft novel writing class. I highly recommend it. And each week we kind of had some writing goals and word count goals. But the goal of the class was not to do, there was no critique involved. Each class was partly a lecture where we learned some technique, plot, narrative, perspective, things like that. Just very basic, very rudimentary. But then, there was also time during the class to do some writing. And so, but the goal was to do a first draft. And I think one of the first pieces of advice and the best piece of advice we were given is just write. Full steam ahead. Don't stop yourself along the way, and edit as you go.
Right.
And if I could give any author that advice, that's it. So for me, during the actual first draft writing process, I didn't set back and say, what am I doing wrong? I had permission. I'd given myself permission. I'd been given permission by the instructor that if I need to change something halfway through, I can change it, and then I could go back and fix it all later.
Okay.
So that was a really nice way to approach this for me.
Okay. So are you a plotter, a pantser, a combination? Did you have an outline? Did you know where the thing ended? How did that work out?
So I was a plotter. I mean, I had an outline, and I liked that. I mean, at my core, I'm an attorney. And so very little of what we do is by the seat of our pants. And so for me, I had a general idea of the structure and what I needed to hit on. And so I found that there were some days where I was like, I just want to write this chapter where Rachel meets Jack at the restaurant. And I did. And it was so fabulous. Like, I just like was like, great. Now I have that chapter there and I could write something else and go back. So it was a really like, so until I finished a draft, so I didn't know, I basically had like 20 Word documents of chapters. And then I just reorganized because I didn't know anything about writing.
Okay. Oh, so each chapter was its own
Word document.
Oh my God. Okay.
And then I just like was like, okay. And I basically like put it together like a puzzle. And now I know about Scrivener and there are all these amazing writing programs. And I think, and I've been playing around with those. I think it's much more practical because you can move things around. You don't have to physically, and it keeps everything in one place. But
right.
And I really love that. So I was a plotter, but the way I wrote was almost like a pantser because I could just sort of go from place to place.
Like wherever you felt called, whatever scene or chapter or beat you felt called to write, that's what you wrote.
Exactly. Which was
so
fun.
How long between when you first started and how long did it take you to get what you would consider the first draft?
So I was fast.
Okay.
I started this class in July and by September I had a draft. And so that I understand now, very unusual. But
I would like to get that through osmosis right now. If you could just send that through the screen because continue.
I think I had a few things going for me that allowed me to do that. First, will say I'm on the other side of this now. And as I'm trying to work on another book, it's much harder. So
it's much harder the second time?
Well, it's much harder to find the time, I think.
Okay.
Now I'm balancing so many different, it's not, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but it's not just writing a book. There's so much more that goes into it and promotion and, the marketing of it all. And
right.
There's just so much time that I don't have, especially, being a mom and working and all those things. But when I wrote this book, it was over the summer for the most part. And my older daughter was at sleepaway camp. So I did have one less child to be focused on, which was really, and she, at the time was younger and went to bed early and she was in camp during the day. It was an easier piece. It was also COVID. So while I was still working, I was working from home. So, I didn't have the commute. I had, I had some extra, like if I had time during lunch, I might stop right for, an hour and get back to work. So I had that, I think was a real, gift for sure in terms of timing. But the other piece for me, and I think this is a theme that I'm realizing now, is I had no pressure at all. I'd not been I think there are so many people who are working their entire lives to be a writer, and it is so hard. But for me, this was like, let me see if I can do this.
Right.
And so, and I did it and I liked it so much. And because I'm such a big reader, as are you, at night when I'm reading, maybe I'm watching a show, I kind of gave that up for a few months.
Oh, I got excited for a minute. The audience couldn't see me.
She was excited. Where did I lose you?
I know. And I always tell people, like, you don't have to give it up forever. Just a short time frame. I mean, if we take stock of our, when people say, I don't have time, I'm often like, listen, you don't need 6 hours at a stretch. You need 20 minutes. So give me your schedule. I can find you 20 minutes.
Yes. But I think you were disappointed that I said I gave up all my TV and my reading. For that brief period, while I was deep in this story, my story, I was choosing almost as like my restful evening activity. I was choosing to write. I know that's unusual, but it was like, but again, this was for me. This was like and so but now again, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Well, we were up watching Fargo last night, which is so terrific. I mean, there's not, I think obviously everybody operates differently, but in my initial attempt, that's what I found that I was doing, which worked out well.
Which worked. And I mean, so here's why I got excited, because what I thought you were going to say, I was clearly projecting, as the therapeutic community would say. I thought you were going to say that you, in reading other books and in watching TV, you got great ideas that kept because that's my justification, Jessica, for continuing to watch TV. And, one of the justifications for continuing to read books while I'm writing one, is like, Frasier just gave me a really good idea, whatever the case may be.
I think I wish, because I love to read, I wish I was and television, yes, television is a little more safe for me, but because I'm such a reader, I just somehow, and I haven't gotten back into that headspace yet. I'm reading all the time now, but during that like real heavy drafting phase, there was no part of me that could allow myself to fall into someone else's story.
Okay, that makes total sense. Yeah.
So
and it's interesting because, I mean, I've said this before, but I'm working on my first novel. So my first 6 books were all nonfiction. And I feel like one of the things that I'm curious about, the more people I talk to, is learning what their background is outside of writing. Because for people who have a background that's more structured, so law, medicine, accounting, it's interesting how it transfers in seemingly to their ability to be structured with book writing, whether it's plot, timing, et cetera. And then you've got the rest of us poor people who are just creatives. And I was just thinking this morning that I feel like my rich imagination and tendency to overthink are equally good and bad when it comes to writing a novel, because I aspire to be in that place where you can just sit down and gut it out.
Yeah.
And get to the end.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly overthink. So I share that with you in life. I mean, of course, in life I do. But yes, I think I'm forced to be very productive during the workday, and carving out time to write or to meet a friend for lunch or spend time with my kids has just always sort of been the way I've had to function.
Right.
So writing naturally worked its way into that. It's hard, I think, if I'm on, say, a roll, and I'm like loving what I'm writing, and then I'm like, I have to switch gears into being a lawyer. That is very difficult. But for me, it's always been, I'm a litigator. Now I work in-house at a manufacturing company, but for a while I was writing briefs on deadlines, and it really it forces you, I think, to just be very focused on your time. And I think it's also just like you get a skill set. For me, with being a lawyer, I think is a particular advantage, especially as a litigator, because you're doing so much writing. So the breadth of a novel wasn't scary to me. I mean, it's a lot more pages than that. But, I have lots of practice writing, 10, 20 page motions. So there was that translated at least into like, not the fatigue and figuring things out. It helps also, I think, with, jumping ahead to the editing process, because you can't be so precious. There's always people looking at your work and giving you feedback.
Okay, well, I coincidentally, that's where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
So once you got to a certain point, did you always know that you wanted to traditionally, remind me who your publisher is?
Union Square.
Union Square. Did you always know that you wanted to go traditional?
Yeah, I mean, for me, yes, I think that I did. I wanted to see if I could.
Okay.
I hadn't explored self-publishing. So, the first step for me was, let me see if I can find an agent. Sure. And so I did, and I was very fortunate. I found an agent relatively quickly. And so that put me on this path where we were going to submit my manuscript around and see if someone was going to buy it. So yeah, I mean, that was a pretty straightforward path.
Okay. And did you have it edited before you went to your agent?
No, there's so
No.
many things that I now, no, my agent, thank God, really connected with the manuscript.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it was rough. I didn't know that at the time because I had, it's funny. There are so many people out there who are just these beautiful writers. And those are the books that I just love, and for me, I wrote and I think, it's funny. My two best friends read my book, 2 years ago or a year and a, a
Right.
long time ago. And I'm like, just wait until you look at it again, because it is so much, better and cleaner.
Right.
And just like, and they're like, but it was amazing. I'm like, because you love me and I love you, but no, no, no. There's so much that
But
goes.
don't you think that's so? I mean, the more people I keep saying, it's like a on repeat. The more people I talk to,
Yeah.
but it's like I think that as authors or authors, aspiring authors, people who are working on their first thing, don't realize yes, it has to be in the best shape you can get it into. But what we end up reading as consumers is usually pretty far. I mean, it's been developed
Yes.
significantly, whether it's by an agent and an editor or just the editor or editor, agent, editor,
Right.
yeah.
Well, I think that's so true. And again, and as a reader, I had no idea. And so as a new writer, I also had no idea. And because my agent did like my book in its, maybe more raw form, she felt, we agreed it was ready to be sent out on submission. And then I actually did not get the response initially that we were hoping for. So I did get rejections. And I ended up then saying, wait a minute. And my agent gave me some great critique, and before we went out, and I put it in, but I think she just was really excited about it, and as was I. And so
Yes.
it needed work. So at that point, after having gone through some rejections, I said, let me see if I can have someone look at it and give me some feedback. So I did engage a woman who, I was very sort of, everybody does editing differently. But for me, I was very much like, I don't want someone to go in and edit my book. I want someone to tell me what I need to do to make this book better. Because I was very much like challenging myself. If I'm going to really try and do this, I want to be able to do it for real and for myself. So I did work with this fantastic editor, and she really, I have a habit apparently of, telling, not showing, and or showing, not telling, telling, not show. I'm not an MFA. I don't even know, but I wasn't doing it right.
Telling, not showing. Yes.
Right. And so, these are things where she was flagging for me. And then I was able to, okay, I know how to I can flesh out that scene. I can get in dialogue here. And so when I did that, the book definitely started its better, improved transformation. And then after that, when Elizabeth went back out on submission with my book, then we were able to sell it to Union Square. So it was definitely well worth it. And I don't even mind that it took that extra time, with getting, because it really just gave me a taste of this industry. And it is a hard industry. It's a really tough industry. So
it's complicated too. And it's changing all the time. And there are just no one size fits all, one experience fits all. It's just a very different thing. Can we say who your agent is?
Sure. I'm with Sterling Lord Literalistic, Elizabeth Bewley.
Bewley. Okay. I have a friend who has is with Elizabeth Weed. I'll cut this part
sure.
out. But do you know who that is?
Well, yes, because Neely Tabati Alexander.
Yeah.
Do you know Neely? She wrote this fabulous book, Love Buzz.
Yeah.
There's another book coming out soon. And so Elizabeth is her agent. And I
won't cut this out. We have a kind of a running joke. I met Neely about a year ago. She also lives in the Phoenix area. And I talk about her on almost every podcast. It's gotten to the point where I'm almost not, stalker is a strong word, but I'm almost challenging myself to mention her now in every podcast because I don't know that there's been one where I haven't messaged her
I
or
love
mentioned her.
it. Well, she's
Yeah.
great. She actually wrote a blurb for my book. So
Oh, she did.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. She was just someone who, she was someone who, you reach out to these other debut author, like for me, and I just was like, let me see who I think I might want to be friends with, and so there were a
Yeah.
few other women who I've connected to. She's definitely one of them, but I could talk to you a lot about the author community because that has been just
Let's
unbelievable.
talk about that because I think if you're up for it, because I think that, one of the things I asked, I don't know which social media platform it was, but what people who are looking to publish, what was most important to them about their publishing experience, right? Was
Mhm.
it getting in advance? What was it? And by far and away, the most important thing I hear is team. I want a team.
Sure.
And I think there's a misconception that if you're an indie author, you can't have a team. That's not, you just get to create your own team, is the way that I look at it. But the author community part of it is something else
Yeah.
because people really, I think we're craving community still post pandemic. And it's the best part of this industry, in my experience.
I was blown away. So, when I first, I didn't know any authors, personally, but I'm a reader and, I think authors are phenomenal. And so, I'm on Instagram and I started following authors that I liked and I started reaching out to authors that I wanted to connect to. And there are some people that were just so warm and open and met with me. I had a very early meeting, a lunch date with Annabelle Monahan, who wrote
Oh, I
she
love her.
she is a dream of a person and she's
Yes.
so funny. And she wrote Nora Goes Off Script,
Yep.
and Same Time Next Summer. And she's another book coming out this
Yep.
summer.
I cannot wait. Right.
And she and I sat down. She actually lives nearby, near where
Okay.
I live, and we got together and we just had the most phenomenal discussion. And she was so just helpful. And then when it was time to ask someone to look, to read my book and potentially, write a blurb, she was at the top of my list, and she so graciously did that. And now her words are on my cover, which
Yes.
it's a dream come true. And then Amy Popel is another one who wrote The Sweet Spot, and she's so warm. And I asked her also out for coffee, and we ended up sitting for like 4 hours, and just and the list goes on. There's living in New York. There's a huge community of people. Jackie Friedland is another one, and she's terrific. There's just so many people who have been willing to read my book, help promote me. I've been, as I'm starting to schedule events, my book comes out on January 16th. I'm talking to Annabelle on the
I
night at
know.
Books in Greenwich, and then I have a plan to do a conversation with Jackie Friedland. Actually, we live nearby, but we're meeting in Florida,
Oh my God.
which is so
Yeah.
cool. And just lots of different. Christy Tate is I'm a huge fan of hers. So just all these people are so open. And the biggest mantra, I think everyone has is there is enough room for all of us if it's the
God
best,
bless.
right?
I mean, for real. Like I think that's one of the reasons I love, beyond my love of words and story and all of that. It's one of the least competitive at the business level. It's very competitive and it's difficult and all that.
Right.
But at the just the like the ground communication and community level, it's so supportive. And I've not had an experience specifically with women, and I really haven't had one with men either, but I love the women community, the female community of this, because nobody has ever expressed anything to me or within earshot that would be like, what if she does better than I do?
Right.
Like what, like, oh God, I think she's going to be, and almost every other space I've been in, and I've been in several different spaces, that's the prevailing mantra
Yeah.
is like,
Oh, definitely.
right, like keep everything close to the vest. Don't share agent name, not agent names, but in whatever
Yeah.
their version of the agent name is in their world. Don't share
Mhm.
agent names. Don't share publisher contacts. Don't share editor names. Don't share. But in this space, everybody is so. It's like the high tide raises all boats,
Yeah,
right? It's just
absolutely. And
yeah,
that's exactly what it is.
yeah,
I think everybody, yeah, wants to lift each other up, and we all benefit, I think, from each other's successes. If people are reading, which not everybody is a big reader, and if people are reading and they liked her book, they might like my book, and if or maybe if they liked her book, I'm going to tell them to read her book, and
yep,
it's really wonderful. And it was such a surprise for me, that I've now tapped into this whole community of wonderful women who are my friends, absolutely
yes,
want to spend time with.
yes.
So, it can be a solitary profession, writing, but it just doesn't have to be, because, there's so many resources. But it's been really, especially as a debut coming in.
Yeah.
But, I have to say, I think for anybody who's looking to embark on this, you have to be willing to put yourself out there.
Well, and that's the thing, because, I'm a big fan of saying you don't have to do anything because, right,
Yeah.
we don't have to do, I mean, beyond feed our children and things like that. We don't have to do anything.
Sure.
However, the idea that, I mean, it's lovely to think sometimes that I could sit in a corner and book talk could be the impetus that takes my book all the way. That happened once. It probably won't happen again. I mean, book talk is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But if you're not comfortable putting yourself out there or getting comfortable, I mean, that's the thing too, is sometimes it's like, okay, you're not comfortable now. Are you willing to dip your toe in? So maybe someone isn't comfortable doing a face-to-face event, but they're willing to do a podcast. And that's how they can dip in. So as you come up on the launch, what has that process been like for you with planning? Has your publisher been really helpful with planning all of those events? Have you had to really, because that's the other thing that I talk a lot to people about is there is a misconception that the traditional publishing houses will do all of your marketing, and it varies.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that's not the case.
No, and I think I'm new to this industry, so I
Mhm.
don't know as much, I don't know what other people's experiences are, but I do think there's a bigger emphasis on the authors doing a lot of their own reach out. So I have done that. And I think you're right. I mean, you can hope that you have the success on Book Talk and Bookstagram and wherever, but unless they know about your book or you've
Right.
made that connection with them, they're less inclined, I think, to consider you. So, I am lucky to be working with, a great team at Union Square. I have also, and we could have a whole other podcast on this, but I did make the decision to engage an outside publicist to help me.
A lot of people do.
Yeah. And that was a very difficult decision for me, but I did look at it as an investment in my career, because this is something I love and something I hope to be able to do down the road.
Have you been happy with that experience thus far? And if yes,
Yeah.
can we say who it is? Because
Sure. Yes, I'm working with Leo PR.
Okay.
Jessica Brock and Kristen Dwyer, and they're terrific. And what has been useful is that, two things. I mean, Jessica's sending my book out to, all the media outlets, and that's not something I have the contacts for. I can't do that myself. And while my publisher certainly has those contacts, they have their hands full. They have a lot of other people.
Yeah.
And they also, and I don't know the case, but I believe, and what I've been told is different publishing houses have, different priority titles and different, and so it became clear to me that if I really wanted to push this book, and I would be better served by working with them, with Leo PR, and it has been terrific. But and also just, having a full-time job, I certainly can't manage, the planning of events and things. So that's
Sure.
been just terrific. But I think also I'm pretty, assertive, and I'll get myself out there,
Yeah.
and it helps, I think, to be a former litigator, because obviously I'm used to public speaking.
I can't even imagine. You walk into a bookstore. Would you like to carry this? No. I take over, Jessica. What do we do from
Yes.
here?
Well, actually, no. I mean, yes, it is so funny. I didn't
Yeah.
ever think of myself this way, but it is true that it's like, I'm just going to ask. I'm just going to ask. And
Here's this
yeah.
is like, I had one of my authors reached out to me last night, and she said, okay, so here's the deal. You're never going to believe this. I said, I will, whatever it is. I promise I'll believe it. And she said, I was in SFO, San Francisco, International Airport.
Yep.
And I walked by Compass Books, which is one of their big, bookstores in SFO. And she said, I just walked right in, and I had my ARC with me, and she's an indie author. I mean, she's with me, so she's indie. And she said, would you be interested in carrying this? And the book is on empty nesting and managing the empty nest years. And the guy who happened, air quotes, I mean, because there's no coincidence, to be the owner, I believe, or the manager or something, said, oh my gosh, I need this. Like, we are going through this right now. And so she said, oh, great. Well, would you be interested in carrying it? And he said, absolutely. So he looked it up, and, you can get that distribution now as an indie author. You don't have to be traditionally published to be distributed by Ingram. And so he was placing an order. It doesn't come out till February. So all that to say, you just have to be willing to ask.
Yeah. You do. You get rejected. You get rejected. Listen, yeah. And that's where the thinking about things after that come in. Who cares?
Yes.
It's like, it's really true. I mean, and I think it's hard. I think a lot of people who are writers are almost more naturally introspective, and that can be tricky. I'm really, I am sympathetic to that. I think it's really tough. Because one thing they don't tell authors is how much work I think goes into actually self-marketing your own book.
Yeah.
Whether it's, meeting in person or doing a podcast and just reaching out to people. So, it's definitely, I've really, that fills me up. I enjoy that, but I understand why that's difficult for people. And it's certainly not something that necessarily going into this.
Or know how to do. I mean, I love the showing up part. I love, talking and going to events. Setting it all up is not my jam, right?
No.
So it's, either I have to figure out how to make it my jam, or I have to hire somebody else to do it.
Sure.
But it's the same thing. Do you think that as a litigator, because I imagine, when I'm a litigator in my dreams, that you deal very much in facts. Something's a fact or it's not. Does that allow you to be less, to take things less personally, maybe? Like, do you find that you're not as analytical about, well, why did they say no? It's like, no, they just said no. Move on.
Right. No, I mean, I think that piece and certainly as different as writing as a lawyer is from writing fiction, there is creativity that goes into making an argument, because the law might be the law, but interpretation and looking, and then research and different, case law and different outcomes. There is so much, you do have the opportunity to infuse some creativity into that writing style.
Yes.
Where I think being a lawyer really helped me is I didn't ever feel so precious about my writing during the editing process.
Okay.
So when of course, everybody gets tied to certain things and phrases, but I was used to handing a brief to the senior partner and having her like X out paragraphs, or, asking me to go deeper. And so I think that does prepare you in not feeling so, I just never felt so angsty about it. And I also like that process. I think it's fun to go back in and, come up with something else to say. So, I did enjoy that. I more than I think some people do.
Well, and I think sometimes there's the perception, if you haven't done it, that when you finish, like, people don't think of editing as sort of phase 2 and then marketing as phase 3. They think, well, the book is done. It's done. Like we're going to skip, like editing doesn't exist, right? We're going to skip to publishing and promoting. And so when a manuscript comes back heavily redlined, or as I like to say, hemorrhaging, I think authors can sometimes feel like, oh my God, I didn't, as opposed to looking at it and thinking, wow, I'm curious. This is a lot of feedback. I'm really curious how this can make it better. It's just like if they go into it thinking, I'm done, and then it clearly becomes evident that they are not, then
Well, I think editors are well, trained to be kind to their authors. So even if you get this, bleeding manuscript back, hopefully you're hearing, at least verbally, all the wonderful things that you did. And if you aren't,
that is so important. That is so important. And I honestly didn't realize, I mean, I'm an editor as well. And I make it a point to ensure that I'm complimenting when things are done well and when, sentences make me laugh and things like that, because I think that as editors, we're so focused on making it better that we don't, sometimes we just don't do a great job, if we're not intentional about it, of letting the author know where it's already great. And they really need to hear that. That's really important.
Yes, I did. I did.
I did too.
I know I always will. It is so hard to put yourself out there. And so I am not someone who minds making changes, but I really want to know that you loved it, or it's I'm sure a very difficult balance for editors to achieve.
It's just something to remember, I think, as an editor, is like, don't just gloss over when I see something and it makes me laugh, or I think, wow, what a great combination of words. I just remind them, don't gloss over, let them know they need to. It's kind of that same thing of if you see somebody and they have a shirt and you love it, just say, I love your shirt. Because sometimes we'll assume that everyone else is telling them that they love their shirt. And in truth, they put on that shirt that morning wondering, do I look like an idiot? And
I think that's right. And why there's no harm in making someone feel good. So
there's never any harm in being kind, people. No. That is the lesson. Okay, I'm going to link everything. Thank you so much. By the time this comes out, which will be next week, the book will be out.
Yay.
And I would love it if you would be willing to come back in a few months and talk about the launch experience and the promo experience and what you enjoyed and didn't enjoy and what's going on with the next book. When is there a plan for the next book in terms of timing?
No, not yet. I am really still trying to figure it out. And that definitely will be a fun next topic, because it is so hard to fit it all in. But I've really enjoyed this, and I would certainly love to come back. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, this is your friendly reminder to follow or subscribe, leave a quick review, and share it with someone you know has a great story or message, but isn't sure what to do next. Also, remember to check out publishaprofitablebook.com for book writing resources and tips, and to see all the ways we can work together to get your book out into the world. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk with you again soon.